Hello. Ibrahim Traore is an African leader who asked a question to himself and many other leaders of the world and of America have asked a question, like what to do about poverty. One of the things is not to separate subjects, because that's, in other words, if we separate and take poverty as itself, we're leaving out all the answers. In other words, because it's bigger than and more finite than poverty is how the breaching method before America's founders were born. It designed suburbs. It designed houses. It had internationally monitored conversations entrenched and it had roles with them. And then America's founders were born. Already nobody had free speech. Everyone was forced to pretend to have free speech. But our campuses are criminally foreign influenced / hyper-criminally foreign influenced, which is the key. Because everyone knows our campuses are at countries A through Z are criminally foreign influenced. And if and where they say they don't know that, their logic and their nature of logic has demonstrations of the same. This is why mandated law is supposed to be, in other words, interbranch are not supposed to forbid paper so they can just keep stacking fake things in databases. There is a director, there's a leader of the FBI. Leader is plural. There's a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. For example, that associated with criminal enterprises and with criminal foreign influences. But we have not had hyper-criminal foreign influences addressed, even though they are recorded. And a whole bunch of names tied to these leaders of our countries have collusion /S at the World Trade Center. Self-valued only because as victims / hyper victims, they didn't know how to respond to subject treatments like slavery, forced where a breaching method measures and maintains things that are left out from that can't be left out. Like, in other words, nobody in New York City, the suburbs were designed before America's founders were born for torture, for extortion, and for slavery. One reason is because the breaching method knew that those three things would be manifest relative to its forced roles with itself as systems forced, as countries A through Z, as systems tactical ulterior from the human species body of individual bodies, appreciating why and how all group differences are demonstrated to us, generated by a body of value progression that is generating other species bodies too. Other species, individual distinct species bodies, fish, birds, individual species bodies of individual bodies. Again, all group differences. That's what we are being shown. And ancients appreciated this. And we would have, appreciated it too, because, it would have been brought up, because nature is constantly bringing it up. Except for how what nature brings up is replaced. And a breaching method showed, even though no one wanted roles with itself, since before modern religious messengers were born, already from off their locations there are proofs, because it's still from off the locations keeping hyper additional self-value collusion /S at campuses A through Z and exceptions. This breaching method has everyone's self-value roles using exceptions in exception nature, tactical ulterior from the way it does, true all ways, not denying the slightest sequence shift, for example, not self-value while haven't been used remotely. See, where everyone is being used remotely, self-valued that way, and not realizing is right where they defend uses of words like poverty. They have America's history right through the science, names of the people of the sciences. The military is criminally foreign influenced campuses. They are being and have been used remotely, criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence at countries A through Z. Now, see, this brings up nature of debate, where the nature of debate was already recorded, used criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. But the people who are already guys pretend they need to be integrity. Then people say, well, we believe people have to have faith in the police or faith in the courts. In other words, The difference of their guilt. This in America, there are witch trials, places that are associated with founding locations. And still at the founding locations in America, they have other communicated for our founders. And for those locations, then they communicated for us to have communicated for those locations. James Madison, there were founders, plural, that we don't know the names of. They had this declassified for us. James Madison, they asked to be referred to as. And his plan they used. And then they went and counter-extorted. Even George Washington was counter-extorted. But thank God he agreed to help counter-extort other founders. Other presidents, other leaders, rather. Because our founders, the only one we know is our founder, besides the Native Americans, even the ones who didn't agree. They are automatically our founders. There are three natures of founders. There are founders that agree to help and be part of what James Madison's about. See, president/chief. See, we don't have this taught through our schools. They have our founders' words used, self-valued rules with our founders, because they're being used remotely, because of everything they do. Syntactically, their appreciation. The breaching method uses that remotely. They have other communicated about what made James Madison's plan made the Civil War. There was slavery and roles entrenched, distinctly, but non-distinctly too. Northern colonies and southern colonies. And there were more than the original 13. And the narratives behind that. Everyone had to put fake motivations. One of the reasons, because everyone's motivations were tied to the breaching method, /S. It made the /S part roles, not just with internationally monitored conversations. I learned at Central Connecticut State University in notes, which is distinct from reading in a book. And my book was stolen from me. There are proofs that former director of the FBI and courts family members have roles with that, because of their roles also with child abuses, elderly abuses. Even victims advocates involved with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, self-valued roles. The state of Connecticut has a corrections offices at a town line, though. And the same thing, with exception with the state judicial branch offices. And the conjunctions to those places, and all natures of the conjunctions to them, and conjunctions to that, is manifest where and how the breaching method measures and maintains self-valued roles with itself. One of the ways it does this is measuring and maintaining shock and awe responses to, and tries to counter things like poverty with syntax. Everything requires syntax. See, this breaching method made self-valued roles with us as systems tactile ulterior from the one that is showing us its own difference. We're inseparable from all other things, while not, but anyway. And we could ignore its system. And we could all agree at countries A through Z, all of a sudden we agree. But nature will still demonstrate with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, if we're not speaking about power and might the way it asks us to. For example, there is a difference between criminal insidiousness natures of peace. There are differences between criminal insidiousness natures of peace and peace that is not criminal insidiousness nature. In other words, there are criminal insidious. Their truths can be used for lies. Facts can be used for lies. They can be used to screen lies. They can be used to force a nature of conversation that is incapable of affording exceptions in exception nature, appreciated in a special difference, appreciated the way nature tells us, communicates for us to do. One of the things different about the continent of North America, which in other words, we're a continent with countries on it, way fewer. But Africa is a continent with countries. If someone's trying to get a unity for Africa, and it's not only if it's not already a country, all locations, areas, and states. See, we are locations, areas, and states per the dictionary's definition, per nature's roles with the dictionary definition. But then further, that was assigned. That's how we describe it formally. But we have to appreciate how formally, originally, and still, even in the Civil War, a breaching method showed our experts how to speak about that. The names of the people of the sciences are criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrong. The beginning of the Old Testament, for example, per science, has a part at the beginning of it says, only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. And that's before the part with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve, and the names of their generation. That's before that, where it says only defend right here. It doesn't say defend there and then sometimes defend here. It says only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. And the same thing with the Quran. The Quran has a part right up front. It says all that matters is if one's going to be honest about the use of the name as a scientific value of all space/existence. Are they going to call that name Allah or not? Are they going to call it something else? It doesn't say. It says all that matters. It doesn't say all that matters if someone tries not to eat pork or doesn't eat pork. In other words, or someone pray. It says even qualified. It says don't pray in the mosque for the slightest reason. All that matters is if one's going to be honest about that scientific name, its identity, discerning its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that. Honestly, always. Because that's what we are given, an extent to see its complete body. Where we are given means to discern how we didn't invent the other species' bodies, how they have quality aspects in nature distinct from ourselves, but non-distinct too, and simultaneous, but per that further hyper-simultaneous, per that further distinctly, not us nor them, but it's all things anyway. And many pray, but now because there's also what's unnatural, but it's only natural as criminal insidiousness nature. That behind countries A through Z, where they agree about things, to speak about humanity. They have criminally foreign influence nature, factual nature, quality aspects in nature of the of debate of just that can't be defended and afford to be, let alone to portray. Short words proper by nature, let alone the protraction. And that nature that reveals evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere. If we could get on paper and everyone in the world on the same conversation with the impositions of peaceful nuclear energy generation simultaneously with the nuclear weapons and exceptions, we could appreciate the simultaneous / hyper-simultaneous. It will show us what to do. We can make. I saw somewhere on YouTube. I didn't get to see the whole video or whatever. I don't know if it was a YouTube show or what it was. Someone was riding a bicycle. I think it was an advertisement, and they had a plastic bottle on their thing, and they're driving, and it makes water come into the bottle out of nowhere. In other words, we could do things better than free. And we could all agree. Even if we could, okay, we're going to agree. And when all these things start getting dropped off. And then maybe countries let you guys hold things there. Because you said that there's people trying to swim across the ocean, and that's how desperate they are. Abraham Traore said that. In Africa, they're trying to swim to another continent. That's how much torture, extortion, in fact, human nature, slavery therefore physical, still exists. It exists. They don't even allow us to be honest about our founders and what caused the Civil War, because they want and need things to debate. How they get away with that? We have to be able to use phrases like criminal foreign influences. And we have to use, every time we're using that hyper-criminal foreign influence, we have to use that phrase, admit that phrase to the syntax of the names of the people of the sciences, especially in differentially, too, regarding their difference. Boxing, martial arts, and wrestling, nature shows us how they share its identity. They're grouped by it. And they're about fighting by the rules. But the rules have been abridged since some ancient times, / hyper abridged. So how that and why that was supposed to be about evolution, how to cause evolution, fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere, to be and stay being led by, not which we all agree on, but in other words, not just that, but in other words, where we're sure, how we're sure. We don't leave out the smallest finite detail. In other words, these are all natures. They want to have negotiations and backgrounds. And they self-value. They can't be honest about that, so they self-value the bad things as their excuses to themselves and others. And while they're doing that, they're self-valuing that only having been known to be, because a breaching method stayed entrenched. A breaching method had slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies, and had roles with it entrenched. And then America's founders sustained. And then America's founders were born. No one had free speech, therefore. Anybody who would try to counter it with free speech, they had already had that demonstrated to them for generations. They were adapted to, even if they were a majority of people as a body, even if they were everyone. We are in a semi-ancient trap that did bad things to the people of locations, areas, and states to make them have to counter, because only locations, areas, and states could operate the name of a country. And so then they had to counter, and then those people had to counter. What the heck are they doing? In other words, and the breaching method measured and maintained both sides, leaving itself out, blaming what it caused on other things, others, or ourselves. And what no one fathomed is what the breaching method was waiting for. Knowing that more and more, and there are proofs already, the ancients already understood, nature had explained to them, shown them, how where simultaneously nature wants us to be independent and simultaneously unity and simultaneously using that to be led by the hyper difference of it. That one to be and to stay being led by that which is hyper invisible but still discernible, distinctly from the invisible but still discernible, like the parts of speech of English grammar, of the languages. This is about this. But see, the names of the people of the sciences cannot afford to have their own languages, their own sciences, syntax unabridged. They cannot afford to have the other sciences, syntax unabridged. Individually grouped and together, the names of those people of the sciences are a certain type of victim / hyper victim that has syntax in nature that was used criminally, foreign influence, tactical delusions wrought since they were kids, and or they were sensed since they were kids and adapted to. That's why, for example, why and how, even though nature itself and America's founders declassified for us to understand, they demonstrated for us to understand why and how a breaching method reassigned with nature communicates with black pupils, whites of eyes. Rather than and nature itself, what it communicates with that is replaced by a breaching method. They stole that breaching method right from the communications of James Madison and of our founders. And self-valued roles measuring, maintaining when they use his words, when they refer to him as a president, not explaining for him, as they had to classify for us means to. why and how James Madison did not have free speech even as a president. They had to leave slavery entrenched northern colonies, southern colonies. That's why we're supposed to understand right up front where and how they counter-extorted George Washington. And he had to go counter-extort the rest of the colonists and the rest of the Native Americans. And I say the rest of them because Native Americans are part of the group that agreed to help James Madison. And the Native Americans who didn't know what to do, they're also our founders. And the Native Americans who disagree with it, they're also our founders. Just like the people who disagree with our founders, because they don't understand. We're still being counter-extorted. I mean, we're still being forced to let ourselves tell on the breach branches of government, their collusions with the state corrections office and judicial branch offices, with the breaching methods uses of names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, the difference of the news, putting the same secret ships at the same time with the people of the courts, their family members, other natures of conjunctions to themselves at the same time, and with names next to body dumping spots that are also involved with all kinds of cases, town lines. This breaching method never stopped being collusion /S with every nature of crime scene. Black pupils. I'll see the whites of eyes. The one I have to figure out who said that. I don't even remember who said that. But that's one sentence that every American remembers. We know that someone said, "Don't shoot until you see the whites of eyes." And there are proofs that it is more probably that is ciphered to be deciphered than it was truth or true always. No one had free speech at the time. So they have American history told right through the experts of the names of the people of sciences as collusion /S, where the names of the law are leaning on them, where they have replaced what's necessary to appreciate Marbury versus Madison properly. For example, I'm not even a lawyer. We can discern how lawyers, all sides of criminal and civil cases, again, interbranch and the state corrections office and judicial branch offices, where are maintained criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions are per a method that is interstates. At countries A through Z, too. Locations, areas, and states are criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. 3 ways. That's why, and no one wanted collusion, except for where and how they speak on motives, for example, leaving out the breaching method's roles with everyone's motives. The breaching method is what motivates people to deny someone's evidence just because it's not written down. We have black people as whites of eyes. They have been blaming the breaching method showed the experts on the law, the experts on the people of the sciences, how to read the law. The breaching method, they declassified stuff for us. The breaching method had it understood too. It measures and maintains self-guided rules with the use of our words, of our presidents, of our founders, let alone then of our presidents and of the people, including Native Americans, let alone of the ones behind and with James Madison and his plan. So there's a differences racket, and I have to do a little thing to make the quality of fact sheet nature, the time achievements, and the mistakes they make, obviously because of that, and they pretend they don't realize. Oh, well, that's what the case said. They have a Sandy Hook campuses in Newtown, Connecticut, involved with the prison there, involved with other campuses, with the judicial branch office and corrections offices, with all kinds of medicines and drugs crimes and relative delusions. But they switch and forge names into branch. And with the federal government. They have a former director, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants, their family members, and their lawyer, involved with criminally foreign influence use of location /S in every campus I went to. And then when I try to speak about that, they pretend I spoke about my father and his legal cases. He had legal cases where he won an NLRB case, a National Labor Relations Board case, against some a corrupt people involved with a corrupt union, but they are also involved with predicate acts against me. And there was a case ongoing. They put me in fake conversations about both those cases, and with the news that put me in fake conversations with themselves and with others, and about the World Trade Center attack. WFSB, Connecticut's Channel 3 News, has roles with sexual and medical offenders of kids, foreign and domestic. The mental health tied to them, they are personally and professionally tied to prosecutors and judges and their kids involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids, or work criminal enterprise by everyone at the same time, and the news and names next to them. We have the answers, and they're not hard. The only thing that's hard is when people try to pretend that there's not a hyper foreign influence, criminal or let alone criminal foreign influences involved. In other words. So that's why we need to speak bad about foreign at countries A through Z, though. That's why we need to understand the hyper foreign. It designed this game to keep other things, others, ourselves blamed, even when correctly blamed exactly the way it wants and needs to hide behind and through that. At countries A through Z has complete remote possession, used criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, and pretending other by a breaching method. They can't make a subject treatment. In other words, if the whole world starts begging with the threshold nations with the nuclear weapons, we can just open negotiations with that. Let the ones who are trying to make them not do that because they don't know how to control themselves anyway, and make them like a defense weapon, but not as a weapon. We're going against the same thing. In other words, we can make these negatives into hyper positives. There's a difference between making positives out of negatives that are just still a criminal insidiousness nature. The breaching method needs us to think like that, how to make criminal insidiousness natures of positive and negative. Oh, that's always been. That's why we have the military has the Civil War, the experts on the wars. They have the locations listed where there's a General King involved with the study of wars, has collusion, self-valued, not even realizing, with a breaching method, using them remotely, replacing with the World Trade Center, replacing what caused the Civil War, screening rules with the slavery method against all the fact-human nature, even against our founders. America's founders were fact-human nature, tortured, extorted, and enslaved. Whoever denies that will have inherent to, active to, and progressive to their logic, their nature of logic demonstration, / that's of the same thing. That's why they self-value that other people had their scientists, the principles reversed. Then they start pretending like, in other words, they can't even discern. That's why they can't explain the Monroe Doctrine without hurting the feelings of Native Americans. Nature wants that. And our founders, we're not following with true ways. We're not following what our founders communicated for us. The Constitution was supposed to get unabridged. And why and how we have rights that are too numerous to have to list them, let alone some little fake punks with badges and guns. And they want respect. They're currently foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw, collusion /S. They never stop being. That's another thing, too. Fake respect they want when they know there are collusions. That's recorded. That's why they can't get on paper now. All we have to do, get the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center, I was in the court next to the World Trade Center attack. Americans, Africa, let's gather around. Let's get them on paper. With the Wethersfield police from Connecticut had collusions with people from Washington, D.C., and from the World Trade Center who have predicate acts methods that are singular, that are used in ways they're going to understand more and more and start adapting. That's why you need to get them on paper as soon as possible. With the Wethersfield police, they've been using wire crime acts, mail crime acts. They put me in fake conversations with them at the police station when I was a kid and I was an adult. Wethersfield police. They have some Mendez police. They have some intercultural. They have some black KKK, Confederate Black team, and their educators involved with a differences racket. And constantly people being planting and to lie about what came first. They don't even know themselves, but where they're going to discern it. Now, all this stuff is manifest. I tell it best so many ways, vaccines. It's not, that's one of the reasons that we have not addressed poverty. Think about it. All those people in New York City, go get a job. That's what they want. Some morons go doing that and keeping them angry. And then they pretend they don't understand why people don't listen to the cops. They're involved with fact, tribunation, torture, extortion, slavery of those people. They know that our founders are taught wrong. That's why they have it hid, the proofs. And they have they're sensing for the breaching method too, self-body roles. Otherwise, they sense anyone who bring it up. These things aren't even debatable. So they do this to keep all subject treatments and all forms of calmness, all forms or of aggression as criminal and seditious nature, psychopath definitions of it. Get the psychopaths on paper, one name and sequence, and get me off the fake conversations with WFSB. At the same time, Connecticut's Channel 8 or 30 News with the FBI and their sources and with the intelligence they have them all wrong along Route 175 from Old Weathersfield's founding locations with a witch trials place right next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. They have the witch trials place. They bring that up as a subject by itself. And they are measured and maintained. Sense and sensibility, sensing for the breaching method without entertained. They're criminally formidable, tactically delusions. Oh, that's mean. In other words, sense and sensibility, sensing for the breaching method. The hyperform. In other words, all we hate to do is have 5 mandated law followed. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. Watch what I caught them doing with the intercultural and their differences rackets, even their sexual groups. Then they hide life progressions at corners of streets with them. Tim O'Brien and Ray Collo are recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed by a Rick Sanfaglione, involved with all kinds of people and their family members that work with campus, putting fake things in databases with their educators. I never even had a class in my life with Tim O'Brien or Andrew O'Brien. They have rules with a bunch of people with the state capitol and next to it too, involved with the World Trade Center attack, and people they said is their cousins, people with the name Scalora, and people they repeated the names of in their confessions. Joshua Julian is involved also with a bunch of people like with the name Violet and Kolvinskis and Demoro and Aiello with the businesses and houses. And Mayana with the businesses and houses next to Harvard Hospital, who have roles with houses and businesses next to campuses, intercities, where they have predicate acts with facts, identity theft, fraud, slanders with the interbred. A bunch of people in the Britain Superior Court involved with wire crimes and acts and federal crimes with kids here, and with their roles personally and professionally with foreign and domestic military, with mental health, with psychiatry, how many medicines crimes they have, how much money they owe, at right where there are hospital campuses. See, we're going to have to change the name of campus to hyper campus and make sure it stays that way. Many pray. I'll donate a water gift, like a water company for you guys. And like a means to make make hyper positives out of negative or to check. And make highly filtered though. Because they said you guys are landlocked. And people are long in water. What? In other words, nature wants that. Nature wants us to long water, but not so we can through systems. In other words, not to blame the people because everyone's, except for when they deny it. But you don't hold them up because the only people that are giving us the water and have a trial with them. In other words, we have to just deal with the from river to the sea. Right now, we have to deal with that, and we have to do it. Nature showing us, nature itself, and the breaching method, distinctly and non-distinctly, though, are showing us. We have to deal with how and why really we are needing to be commerce and jobs and needing food and water so badly, and to have nuclear subjects with exceptions used wrong and fake.